My sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Lord, to you, Lord.
Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom did belong to this world, my attendants would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not here." So Pilate said to him, "Then you are a king." Jesus answered, "You say, I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." The Gospel of the Lord.
As I said at the beginning of Mass, this feast day was started in 1925 by Pope Pius XI. And the reason he wanted to start it was because World War I had just ended. It had been a few years, and communism was making inroads in the Soviet Union and in Europe, and nationalistic feelings were growing all throughout the European continent, and he was concerned that people were putting more emphasis on the worldly things and less emphasis on God. And so he wanted to remind Catholics that their kingdom, their king, is Jesus, and not to be their nationality or their nation. And therefore, he created the solemnity of Christ the King. Now, in 1970, Pope Paul VI, after the Second Vatican Council reforms, moved the feast day to the last Sunday in ordinary time, which is what we celebrate today, Christ the King Sunday, or as they now call it, Christ the King of the universe. And it's an important day, but it kind of gets glossed over because we're right before Advent, and Easter and Christmas is coming, and we're all excited, and everyone's probably already started their holiday shopping. But it's important for us to remember this day because I think, at least for the last 2,000 years, Christians have kind of missed the point of what this kingship is all about. And we've only had this feast day for 90 years, and we still haven't really got it down or understood what the church is trying to teach us. And the reality is what the church is trying to teach us isn't that we shouldn't have countries and loyalties to our country and those things, but that we need to put God first in our hearts. What kind of king is Jesus? Because he's not the kind of king that rules in this world. As he said in our gospel, "My kingdom is not of this world." And that's an important statement, not just for Pilate, but also for the people who've heard that gospel for the first time in that first century, and for us today. Because something happens in John's gospel that's really unique. He's always talking about this hour. When he's at the wedding feast of Cana and his mother asks him to change water into wine, he says, "My hour has not yet come." And then throughout that gospel, he's always reminding the apostles that my hour is not yet arrived. My hour is at hand. What does he mean? What is the writer of John's gospel talking about that hour? And he's talking about that moment of glory that Jesus will have. And most people think that moment of glory that Jesus has is at the resurrection. But in reality, according to John, the glory of Jesus Christ is on the cross. Not at the resurrection on Easter Sunday, but on the cross. So if anyone ever asks you, where is Jesus' throne? If he's a king, where is his throne? His throne is the cross, because at that moment, he reconciles humanity and God. That is the moment when we are reconciled to God. The resurrection, he destroys death and frees us from the death of sin. But it's at the cross that he reconciles us. That's where he shows his glory and receives his glory from the Father. And the importance of that is he's not the kind of king that we have today, or even in the time of Pontius Pilate, or all throughout time. And so his kingship is different. So the question is, where is his kingdom? Well, it's not in this world, but it is, because it's within us. That's the message that Jesus has for Pilate. And Pilate can't really understand it. And I think sometimes we miss it, because we're looking for God out there, somewhere else, anywhere but where he really truly is, within us. He wants to rule in our hearts and in our wills. And when we allow Jesus to come into our hearts, to rule our wills, he will bring with him all of that peace and love that he talked about throughout his ministry. Because the reality is, he's not a king that's going to rule by force. There are plenty of kings in this world who will take their power and rule with force and oppression. We see it constantly throughout history. It doesn't matter what era you live in, there are always somebody who wants to rule through power and oppression, and they will. And they will always come, and they will always go. But only Jesus wants to rule through love. And that love is what sent him to the cross. He was willing to die for each and every one of us to show us that love conquers hate. And I'm sure you're all aware of current events in our time and what happened in France. And the reality is that there are people who want hate to rule. And they want that hate to grow. And they don't just want it to grow in themselves, because if that was all it was, that would be bad enough. But even worse, they want to instill that hate in us. And we cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow the hate of this world to take away from the sacrifice that Jesus made for all of us. And that sacrifice was made on the cross. If you remember, there were people who were walking by Jesus as he was hanging there, and they taunted him. They were like, if you're God, come down off that cross. If you're the Son of Man, Son of God, then take yourself off that cross. You healed others, you saved others, but can't save yourself. But he understood that by staying on that cross, by sacrificing himself in love, he was victorious over hate. And the only way that our world will ever be victorious over hate is through love. That our love must conquer the hate of people. And their hatred can never be allowed to come into our hearts and conquer us. That way, God will reign. But it's each individual. Where God's kingdom comes from is within us. It's in our hearts. And if we can project that, we can project that joy and that love, and nothing they do can take that away. And eventually, as we spread that joy of the gospel of Jesus Christ, it will conquer the world. But it won't conquer it through hate. It just can't work. It doesn't work. And we've tried it, and it hasn't worked. And they've tried it, and it hasn't worked. And it never will work. Only through love in Jesus Christ will the world be conquered and have peace. And when he reigns in our hearts, we will have that peace. We can project that peace into the world. So what is this kingdom like? In that first reading from Daniel, we heard that it is an everlasting kingdom. Well, no kingdom lasts forever. The Roman Empire went away. The Nazis went away. The Soviet Union disbanded. Great Britain and her kingdom kind of broke up. There's still Great Britain, but it's not the empire of the British Empire anymore. All the kingdoms in the human race have all faded away. We can list them all out. The reality is this kingdom doesn't end because it lives in each person who believes. So it can't end. So even if only one of us believed in Jesus Christ as their king, that kingdom would continue on. And so it continues on. And for 2,000 years, it's continued on. So it's here and it's not here because it's within us and yet not throughout the world yet. But it's our job to live that gospel each and every day in our hearts and in our wills to help bring about that kingdom. And someday that will happen. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday the love of Jesus Christ will conquer all hearts and will be victorious over all the evil and hate in this world. And we have to believe in that, we have to project it, and we have to live it. In the second reading, in the book of Revelations, they talk about how God is in control. The reality in the book of Revelation is they're suffering, they're being persecuted, they're being killed. Christians all over the Roman Empire are being arrested, rounded up, and executed. And so John is trying to convince them that yes, this is happening, but in reality, God is in control. That Jesus is the Lord of creation, and he is in control. And that control, the first, the last, the Omega, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, that God has ultimately all control. When I was at the seminary, Monsignor David LaPuma, who was the bishop's secretary at the time, he gave a homily to us, and he had these great words that I thought were just really wonderful. He said that we don't know what the future holds, but we know in whose hands it's held. And we know that it's held in God's hands, and that all the things that happen in the world, God can turn for the good. That the bad things that people do, they want us to hate, we can turn it around and make something good come from it. We can be victorious over all that hate. And then ultimately in our gospel, Pontius Pilate is questioning Jesus, and Jesus turns the table. He turns it around and he questions Pilate, trying to convince Pilate that he is a king. And ultimately he succeeds in showing Pontius Pilate that it is not the kingdom of Rome that will rule forever, but the kingdom of God. And that is the kingdom of truth and love. It's our responsibility to continue to live on that truth and love. And we come every week to receive the Eucharist, to be strengthened and nourished in the body and blood of Jesus Christ, so that we too can then go forth from this place and live that gospel and bring that joy and peace to people. So in this week and in the weeks to come, as we approach Christmas and that joyful moment, let the joy of Jesus Christ be in your hearts and project that joy into the world where hate cannot defeat love and Jesus can ultimately reign as King forever and ever.